Hey everybody, welcome back to the Senators Roundtable. I'm your host Jacob Billington, and before I even introduce my other co-hosts today, it feels really good to be doing this after a win for the first time in 2 weeks. So, just wanted to get that off the table first of all. Dayton, how you doing?
Oh, doing pretty good. Yeah. Not much to report. It's been pretty quiet over here in Saskatchewan. So,
Good. Paul, you still got your feet in the sand down in Mexico. How are you?
Oh, you bet. I mean, it's great, Jacob. I get to say things like "Hola, Jacob," y Dayton, ¿qué tal? And I get to wear cool hats like this. Not bad.
I
Got a little
love it.
fashion. And then I torture the Mexicans with my appalling Spanish. I say things to them like, Mi vida es maravilloso aquí a Mexico. And they cringe and tolerate it. But and then I get to drink a lot of beer down here. I'm actually drinking one right now. Now I'll keep the label covered because far be it from me to shamelessly promote products on this show, or for that matter, consume alcohol. But so I won't name names, but its initials are Pacifico Clara. So if you get a chance, try that one. But
Perfect. Yeah, we haven't seen you in a few weeks, Paul, so it's nice to catch up.
yeah,
Um,
good to be back.
did you get a chance to watch tonight's game, Ottawa Pittsburgh?
Now, not much
No,
hockey down here, despite me writing articles that the NHL should be down here in Mexico. No one is listening to me, but I did
I think that
follow
would be
along
fun.
the line.
Good. Well, it was a pretty good game. Nice to see a win and nice to uh, nice to beat out a team that's fighting for the playoffs, albeit not a very good chance at this point. Um, but yeah, the I'll be honest, the Penguins looked pretty disinterested for a team that's striving for any sense of hope for the playoffs. Um, yeah, they didn't look very good at all. But Jonas Korpisalo looked fantastic. Dayton, did you get a chance to watch the game?
no, unfortunately. I did check on the scores regularly and saw that the Senators had scored first, which is weird, and then scored again,
Yeah.
which is weirder.
Yeah. I mean, Corpusalo is, still doing his Jekyll and Hyde routine. I mean, I checked the third period. I mean, the guy was amazing, right? 0.791, stopped 33 of 34 shots, something like that.
Yeah.
He had a stellar night. Who is this guy? He comes and goes.
Yeah, we need to see some consistency in the net. I like don't even need to be Vesna caliber or anything like that. Just some consistency is what's going to help this team the most. But I'll just give a couple quick thoughts on that. So Zack Ostapchuk made his NHL debut. That was a fantastic game from him. He slotted in as the third line center, and I mean he was getting opportunities in overtime, and he didn't get the assist on it, but with the overtime goal, he intercepted a Sidney Crosby pass, which must have felt pretty good, and then sent the puck up the ice, which directly led to Drake Batherson's goal. He's not going to get credited with the assist, but it was a fantastic shift from Ostapchuk. He had a fantastic game, and especially if you followed his story much, he lost his father when he was 14. Him and his mother have a great relationship. It's a fantastic story, and I think Ostapchuk is kind of showing that he belongs at the NHL level, at least just based on this one game. So I'd like to see some more of that. Um,
Well, yeah, I guess did they get lots of good shots at his mother in the stands? That's kind of a heartwarming story there. But
Yeah, there were a few, and she was the first person they cut to after the goal was scored, so it was
yeah.
pretty good. Another player that did really well in the bottom six was Yuri Schmeichel. Uh, I I expected to see a lot more of him this season, but with the way he's playing, I don't expect that he gets sent down anytime soon. He's looked really good as well. Tim Stutzel, he had a fantastic 200-foot game. The defense looked pretty good. Brandstrom for the second game in a row has looked fantastic. So everybody is just kind of starting to look really good. Goals against have been down a lot over the past 5, 6, 7 games. They've lost most of them, but goals against has been down. They just aren't scoring now. So I don't know what this is going to translate into, but there's a lot of positives to take away out of that 7 game losing streak, which is pretty hard to say.
Yeah, to your point on, I mean, maybe Dayton and I are eating a little crow here because two guys that we argued should be traded, Chikrin and Brandstrom. Like you're right, Chikrin came up with 4 shots on goal. Brandstrom, he had 5, and Stisslow, as you point out, he had 6. So
Well, I hope that Brandstrom has a great finish to his season, so it drives his value up. I still think he needs to be moved.
yeah.
I wrote a piece on that last week,
Mhm.
and there's just no room for him. So you got to start cutting somewhere. This roster needs to be cut and trimmed down to make room for the kids who are doing really well. Like Schmeichel should have a spot, but there's no room. Ostapchuk should have a spot, but there's no room. So let's start cutting some stuff, right? Brandstrom, I think, has to be one of the first guys to get that. And there's other guys who can slot into that spot. Maybe they're not quite ready, but I don't know. I'm looking at the draft.
Yeah.
The rest of this season is kind of whatever for me. And I don't
Ottawa
know if I'm to say that the quiet part out loud, but I'm totally invested in the draft and not paying a lot of attention to the season.
Ottawa is lacking for Macklin.
Let's see it.
Yeah.
Well,
There's a lot of things to take away from how Ottawa's been playing lately. I foolishly bet on the over for Ottawa 3.5 goals with a win. They just haven't been scoring lately. Just being a little bit optimistic. Paul, did you have something to say before we move on?
well, yeah. I mean, you guys or Dayton was kind of alluding to, okay, what do you do in the last part of the season here? I think what do they got? 19 games left, something like that. And I was reading a piece interview to Chuck today, and he's there, give the old college try. We got to show our pride and end strong. Fine, I get that. What else is he going to say? He's the captain of the team, for God's sakes. But you kind of wonder, if you're Staios and Martin, do you want to sort of mix it up a bit? Bring up these kids from Belleville and send a message to everybody that nobody's job is safe, and send a message to these kids from Belleville that, what, if you have a shot at making the roster, we're going to remember what you do in these final games going into training camp. Then, you alluded to the draft. I guess far be it from me to ever suggest any team tank just to improve their position in the draft. But, they're in a strong draft position this year, right? This is probably, they'll have the highest pick since 2020. Depending on who you read, the odds of them getting, I think they've got the 6th best odds of getting the overall number 1 pick in the league. Could be Macklin Celebrini. So, without purposely tanking, the way you can position yourself in the draft is bring up the kids from the AHL. Let's see what they can do. And, I think that's a legitimate thing to do,
Yeah, I wouldn't call it tanking. I don't think any player should be encouraged to not try. I don't think any GM should be encouraged to tell the players to not try. That sends really, really poor messages, and then you end up with a Pittsburgh Penguins roster in the 80s. Even though they vehemently deny it, can't get more obvious than that. But I think you just shift focus, and instead of trying to, finish strong, you take this as an evaluation. This is an extended training camp, I think. Who gets to stick around next year?
Yeah.
Show us that you can stick around. So Schmeichel is making a fantastic argument that he should be here next year. He doesn't have to be. He's only on a 1-year deal. He needs that contract. Who isn't showing that? That this is the time now to analyze that, I think, and bring those up, especially with Norris out for the rest of the season, most likely. That'll free up some room to make some of those transactions throughout the rest of the year.
Yeah, the only thought I really have on that wasn't touched on, and it even was a little bit, but general managers are the only ones in the NHL that actively tank. And that's just based on roster construction. No coach, no player will ever actively tank. It goes against everything that they're raised to do. All integrity of the game is gone once players start tanking. So that's just one quick thought I had on that. And before we move on to the trade deadline, actually, this kind of works as a transition. Ottawa made a very, very big trade a couple years ago. Erik Karlsson sent to the San Jose Sharks. Zack Ostapchuk is the last player in that whole trade to make his NHL debut. Just a little fun fact there. And he did it against Erik Karlsson tonight. So that's pretty fun.
That is a fun fact.
Yeah, so he was one of the second round picks that got sent over. So with this trade deadline, Steve Staios was said to have been one of the busiest GMs. He made one trade, very lackluster trade at that. Now his hands were tied because of the contract that Pierre Dorion signed, full no trade clause. But he traded Vladimir Tarasenko to the Florida Panthers for a third and a fourth round pick. Could end up being two third round picks, but yeah, third and a fourth round pick. That's it for Tarasenko. It was the only place he was willing to go, so not a whole bunch that you can really do about that. But now Ottawa's set up with 2 first round picks, a second round pick, 4 fourth round picks, and then a fifth and a sixth. They got a lot of draft capital headed into this season. I'm interested to see what they do come the offseason. So, first of all, I want to get your thoughts on the trade deadline as a whole. Whether it was you were glad to see him move Tarasenko for a third and a fourth. Were you disappointed that that's all he did? Are you glad that's all he did? We'll start with you on this one, Dayton.
Starting with the Tarasenko stuff, like his hands were entirely tied. Like there was nothing that he could have done other than not trade him.
Yeah.
Florida didn't need Tarasenko. They're doing fine without him. And Tarasenko was only going to go to Florida. So everyone kind of knew that. So the offer Florida gave was, I hesitate to say it was fair. I don't know if it was super fair for what he's producing, but it was something. And so I think Staios took it because you said he was the busiest GM and didn't make a trade. I think he got a rude awakening of what his team is and what people think of his team. The prices were down across the board. Like, I don't think any of the returns struck me in any of the trades at the deadline as like, wow, that's a, big trade for a big trade. It was a big player for a bunch of parts, or it was 2 underperforming guys switched for each other. Everything just kind of seemed on the lower end of value. And so now we look at the Senators, and they are on the lower end of the lower value. And everyone knows it. And I think they were not hesitant to say to Staios that we're going to give you nothing for this. You want to trade Kubalik, who has a terrible contract and having a terrible season? Do you want future considerations? Because that's all we're going to offer. And honestly, I would have taken future considerations for Kubalik. But yeah, like nobody wanted what the Sens were offering. I saw that maybe he was looking for a second for Brandstrom, which I think is a fair offer. You weren't going to get that right now. Maybe you can get that in the offseason. So I think he did a lot of reconnaissance. I think he did a lot of taking notes and figuring out what other teams actually think of his players and starting to do some calculations for some pretty big moves in the offseason.
Yeah, I had some information passed on to me that a lot of teams were calling on. Everybody was calling on Jacob Chikrin because if you're not doing your job. But there was a lot of interest in Erik Brandstrom. I believe Tampa was pretty interested, but again, the return would have been a third or a fourth and a seventh probably. So probably a third and a seventh on the high end. What are you going to do with that? I know that they tried to move Igor Sokolov and Lassie Thompson just for kind of do right by the player. That's kind of something that it's not going to affect the organization very much, but I don't expect either of them to be qualified this offseason, Sokolov or Thompson, and maybe not even Brandstrom. So, Paul, what are your thoughts on the deadline?
Well, I agree with Dayton. There's no surprise on Tarasenko. What Staios got was exactly what the pundits were predicting he'd get. I mean, his hands were tied, so no surprises there. Kubalik, apparently, from what I've been reading, they shopped him around everywhere and couldn't get any interest in the guy at all. I think he certainly didn't rush in to make any trades that wouldn't have resulted in a return. Good asset management on his part. He could have traded Chychrun, but hey, the right deal didn't come along. I'm of the view, though, that perhaps in the off season, some of these discussions, these conversations he's had prior to the deadline may lead to some interesting trades this summer. It's good trades often take a long time to unfold, and this is a hard league to make trades in with the cap being so tight, and you're almost forced to make one-to-one trades, and that's difficult. So you just can't go out and it's not fantasy hockey, right? You just can't go out and pick players off the player tree. And Staios actually said that leading into the trade deadline. A lot of what's going to happen here is going to be determined by the market. So it's a long play, I think, and we should see some things in the summer.
Yeah, I think the term getting tossed around a lot is groundwork, is that Steve Staios laid a lot of groundwork on these trades. He has an idea of what everybody's worth, what teams are interested. Like, for example, them talking to Winnipeg about Jacob Chychrun. What is he worth to you? What are you willing to offer us? What kind of trade are you looking for? So that in the summer, he can call back and say, all right, listen, this is where we were at when we left off. Here's where we can build off of it because I still need this, this, and this out of you. So I do think that an uneventful trade deadline is a positive thing because, like you said, Paul, he didn't jump the gun on anything. He didn't just get pennies on the dollar for every asset that he has. And he's doing his due diligence and getting used to what the general managers are like. Now, he was an assistant general manager in Edmonton, so he does have some relationships, but he's doing a lot of just, how do you do trades? How do we do this? How do we figure something out, me and you? Because every GM has relationships with other GMs. So, like you're probably not going to see too many deals between Brad Treliving and Craig Conroy because that's just not how it's going to work. You see a lot of trades between. I'm trying to think of an example. There's lots of teams that do business with each other regularly. Like you did see Ottawa and Toronto do a lot of deals over the past 10 years or so. There's just teams that always like doing business with other GMs, and it makes sense. So right now, that's kind of what he's doing, is calling around, building those relationships, seeing how it works with each general manager. So I think it's huge positive that he didn't just pull the trigger on anything.
The other thing to keep in mind, the expectations are in Ottawa that there'll be big acquisitions made this summer, but you have to realize once Sanderson's contract kicks in at $8 million, unless I've made a mathematical error here, I think he's only got about $4 million in free cap space. So
it's going to be tight for sure.
What can you do? Yeah.
I do think that there were talks about moving Josh Norris at the deadline. Again, whether it was going to happen or not, I don't know. But I do believe that Josh Norris was not shopped actively, but available. You can call about him ahead of the deadline. But the injury, which we're going to transition right into right now, shut all those conversations down. So if you missed it, Josh Norris, he was taking a turn around the net and he got bumped and he kind of fell this way and hit his shoulder right on that center post of the net. It was a freak accident. It wasn't like his other injuries. Like when he re-injured his shoulder for his surgery 14 months ago, it was on a face-off. Like there was obviously something wrong. If what happened to Josh Norris this time happened to me, I'm sure I would be getting surgery too, as would you, Dayton, as would you, Paul. Everybody would be getting surgery. But when it's your third surgery on the same shoulder, there's a lot of concern about it. There's a lot of players that have gone through a lot of shoulder surgeries, and they're fine. Josh Norris already showed a little bit of decline after his first two. Well, his first one was before he made the NHL. So after his second one, he did show a bit of decline. He wasn't himself this year. This is his third. How concerned are you for his long-term health? We'll start with you again, Dayton.
Incredibly, I think is the short answer for that. Another piece I wrote, I think this one was a couple of weeks ago. when I look at Norris's career so far, I am painfully reminded of Colin White.
Yeah.
And how you had somebody who came in and did a really good job initially, and then an injury took them out. And I think his was a knee injury, if I'm not mistaken.
Colin
But
White was shoulder as well.
oh, was it shoulder as well? Ooh,
Yeah.
that's even worse because when he came back, he was not a player anymore, hardly. He needed to be bought out immediately, and maybe that was a bit harsh by Dorian, but I don't know. I don't know if Dorian had the greatest forethought, um, based on all the contracts that he's signed since then. Anyways, just seeing how Colin White is now playing with all the other teams he's been with in Pittsburgh and Montreal, and like he's not the same player that he was when he was drafted in the first round. And Norris is so much better than White, but you start to see those declines, right?
Yep.
The shoulder is so important, especially for someone playing center. But even if you're not puck handling and shooting, and it's going to take a long time for him to be better. And so they really need to be careful with it. I'm really concerned that they might have sunk $8 million into somebody who's not going to play for basically the next 2 years.
My biggest concern is that for this 8 years, it's going to be an on and off, on and off, on and off thing. He's missed a lot of time. He's come back. He's missed time. He's come back. That's $8 million that you're playing with LTIR. It's so restrictive right now. Steve Staios, so he had surgery. He's probably going to be out for the beginning of next season, and Steve Staios can't do anything to fill that hole because what if he comes back? What if he comes back in November after you just signed? I saw somebody pitch Yanni Gourde for, let's say, $4.5 million. You can't fit that once Norris is back. So what are you going to do? Trade Gourde? What are you going to do in 6 more weeks when Norris re-injures his shoulder? And now you just traded Gourde for nothing because you didn't have any leverage. And now you're still without Norris. I think him bouncing in and out of the lineup is the worst thing possible. Whether you trade him for nothing, trade him with an asset if that's what it takes, buy him out, LTIR all season, anything is a better option than just having him bounce in and out. Paul, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm no orthopedic surgeon, but you have to wonder, right? I mean, he's been injured so many times. Is this an injury that he's truly going to recover from? Carlson, I don't think was ever the same after his Achilles tendon was cut. And how much of this dismal season that he's had can you blame on the injury? Him trying to protect himself. But I agree with you. Him bouncing in and out of long-term injured reserve it wreaks havoc on the plans of the organization to build it. But that said, you're not going to have a lineup of buyers for him at this point, right? And
No.
you're certainly not going to get, what's he, round numbers, $8 million for him. So, yeah, could well be a write-off here. But I agree with you. You've got to do something to bring some certainty around him so that you can go forward and plan.
I want you both to go to your closet and I want you to get your brown leather shoes, your Steve Staios shoes, and close your eyes. And imagine that you are Steve Staios on, I don't know when the date is this year, June 15th, I believe. You get your assistant general manager, Ryan Bowness, comes up to you and says, "Hey, Steve, listen, for about $1.5 million for the next 12 years, we can rid ourselves of this problem. Are you going to pull the trigger? Yay or nay?" No, you're not going to do it?
I won't do it. Nope. Because as we were talking, I thought of another example, a comparable. He's a little bit older, but also still a former Senator. Mark Stone, not the same injury, but bounces in between IR and not the whole season.
Only right before trade deadline.
Okay, fair. But the Vegas Golden Knights aren't hurting.
Right.
They're able to make it work. Is there a reality where the Senators can make that work? Where they have basically a top 7 that they can move guys in and out, and maybe Norris becomes the third line guy and Pinto is the second line guy. And you're not thinking of replacing him, but you're just sort of playing him when he's there, I guess. We know he's a good player. He's a 60, 70 point guy when he's healthy. Will he be ever healthy again? We don't know. I'm more afraid that if he's bought out, you have now handcuffed yourself, not for 8 years, but for 12. And that's, even though it's less money, that's a long time where
It
you
is a long
can't
time.
have a player. Like that's a player's worth of a salary, a fourth liner. They already don't have depth.
Yeah. So I'm looking at the breakdown right now, and I will say it is a little bit better than just $1.5 million a year. It's actually 102,000 in cap relief, so they get an extra 100,000 for the next 3 seasons, and then the cap is supposed to be going up, 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 and barring another global pandemic, it's supposed to go up, 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 up before it hits the 1.5 million a year. So that's a little bit better, but you're 100% right, Dayton. It's at that point, that's well, in 12 years, that could be pretty close to league min, right? Like it's climbing. League minimum might be about $1 million, maybe 1.05. Yeah, you're right. Paul, what do you think? Would you pull the trigger on that buyout?
No, I'm with Dayton. I think you take your lumps right up front. It's going to be painful, but you don't want to tie your hands going forward. And hey, after the surgery, take another look at him next year. You may get lucky, and he may just get turned around. I mean, he had a choice last year, wasn't it? If I recall correctly, between surgery and rehab, and he went the rehab route. And maybe he should have done surgery and then got it over with, and he'd be in a better spot now.
So last year he went with the rehab route, came back
Yeah.
in January and hurt his shoulder again 3 games later, and then had surgery. So he did have the surgery last year, which held him out for training camp this year, which makes it a little bit more concerning because he did have surgery on that shoulder 14
Right.
months ago. So I don't know. I'm a little bit concerned about it. Just looking at the Senators cap friendly right now before we wrap things up. You know who Ottawa is paying more than they would be paying Josh Norris for the next 12 years?
I don't know if I want to know the answer.
Bobby Ryan.
I thought maybe that was him.
Do you know who you could combine that Ottawa is paying this year to get paid more than Ottawa would be paying Josh Norris? Colin White and Michael Del Zotto.
They're still paying those guys, hey?
They're still paying those guys. Colin White for another 4 seasons after this. Although they get cap recapture next year, 625K, but then it's another 875. So league min for 3 years after that.
Yeah.
$1.5 million is 1 or 2 league min players right now. But when you put into perspective that that's already what Ottawa is paying Colin White and Michael Del Zotto, I might take the buyout. It might bite you later. It's going to help you now. Somebody might sign him, and 3 years down the road, he's scoring 44 goals, and you're like, man, I wish Ottawa hung on to him. Instead, they're paying him $1.5 million for the next 10 more years. I think it's going to help them now if they just buy him out. That's like right now they're in dead man's land, no man's land, whatever. They need to get out of it. They built a team, they locked up, they paid everybody, and they're nowhere near the playoffs. They're a bottom 6 team in the NHL. They need flexibility, and it might bite them down the road, like I said. But Josh Norris, the inconsistency is what scares me. And I think that Ottawa is better off without him right now, even if he's good down the road.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's banking a lot on this roster. And I think we've seen this season that this roster is not it.
Right. And so take Josh Norris out of that and you have
I don't
another.
think that's the I think we're focused too much on just like there's one problem. I don't think there is. I think
I
there
don't
is.
think there is either, but now you have $6.5 million
Yeah.
to solve a couple other problems.
I feel like that's really gonna bite the Senators like a lot.
It
That
could. And
buyout.
admittedly, it is extremely short-sighted, but
Yeah.
that's my point, is that right now they need to be short-sighted. They need to fix it right now. And moving out Josh Norris fixes things. Well, moving out Josh Norris doesn't fix things. What you do with that flexibility after moving out Josh Norris fixes things. I think moving out Josh Norris, if buyout is your only option or best option, I'm going to pull the trigger on it. And that I'm criticize me in the comments. I know that that's a hot take. They have $4 million coming off the books in retained salary with Matt Murray and Vladimir Tarasenko. They have $2.5 million coming off the books in buyouts to Bobby Ryan and Michael Del Zotto. If you add another $6.5 million, they have a lot of flexibility. So I don't know. And for the next 3 seasons, that's $8 million. So I don't know. That's just my thoughts. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Paul?
Nope, I think we've covered that one. We're going to see.
All right. Well, let's hope that there's at least one win between now and the next time we chat. By the way things have going, there probably won't be, but we're a very optimistic group. But yeah, so thank you everybody for tuning in. Make sure to check out everybody's content down in the description. Let's hope to see some more Senators success, whatever that looks like, whether it's going down to the third worst team in the league or actually winning a couple of games. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.